And our top focus story on the broadcast is the new team of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That's taking shape. 43 ministers will take oath at 6 p.m., 3 hours from now. And in one of the biggest upsets, it's the exit of Dr. Harshvardhan as the Union Health Minister. Dr. Harshvardhan has just submitted his resignation. He was in the line of fire during the second wave of the COVID pandemic. Sources tell India Today that Prime Minister Narendra Modi was extremely unhappy with Dr. Harshvardhan's performance. Remember, earlier JP Nadda was brought in as the health minister. He's currently the BJP president. Dr. Harshvardhan was reinstated after Nadda became the BJP chief. This is a major development that's taking place. Dr. Harshvardhan has put in his papers, and there were many aspects that were raised, especially in India's fight back in the second COVID wave. India was accused of prematurely declaring victory on COVID-19. The health ministry gave the impression that India was out of the woods. I quickly want to cut across to India Today's National Affairs editor Rahul Srivastava for more on the story. Rahul, it was Dr. Harshvardhan, this was around early March, that he'd already in a way declared victory, saying, this is end game COVID before the second wave that hit us barely a month and a half later. Is that the reason that he's been axed?
See, Gaurav, there is one thing that the pandemic presents an unprecedented challenge in the life of any government anywhere in the world. But the fact is that when the second wave hit, and till now, I don't think in the last 7 years the Prime Minister Narendra Modi government's image has taken a beating like that it did in the month of April and May. And that is why the biggest problem with Dr. Harshvardhan, which was identified, was that his ministry under him, one, it failed to predict the ferocity of the pandemic second surge, and also on the ground he could not coordinate a sense of preparedness all over the country as far as the preparation for a second surge is concerned. In fact, if you recall, sometime in late March and early April, it was the Prime Minister who had to get into the middle of the action. He had to roll up his sleeves and get into the act of meeting oxygen dealers, companies manufacturing oxygen cylinders, ventilators. He had to hold every second day reviews of all kinds. Now that also took the entire blame of the despair among the people to the Prime Minister's door.
Yes.
And the health ministry was supposed to be the most critical component, not just in what the center is doing, but also coordinating with the state. And that coordination was found lacking.
Okay,
and that's
multiple aspects, Rahul. Stay with me for a moment. We are also being joined by Siddharth Zarabi, senior journalist, and Sandeep Ghosh, political commentator. Manisha Priyam joins us on India Today. We'll talk to all our guests about how are they looking at Dr. Harshvardhan putting in his papers. And Manisha Priyam, if I may, it's not just about failing to predict the ferocity of the second wave. It's failing to predict a second wave. In March, Dr. Harshvardhan was saying it's endgame COVID. India is Vishwa Guru, and India was actually exporting vaccines when we should have been vaccinating our people. Then you had cricket matches, then you had elections being announced, and the second wave hit. So despite being a doctor, he failed to predict the second wave, ma'am.
So I don't know whether I can lay the blame as clearly. Prime Minister Modi is primus inter pares, the first amongst his cabinet colleagues and members. He has reviewed the work of his cabinet colleagues. Those answers should be coming from within the cabinet and its deliberations. Probably they will not, because there is really no precedent of doing so. However, there is a blame and an onus on the government, which is that of the cabinet collectively, and the Prime Minister wishes to fix the governance image on two important areas. I had said this yesterday as well on a show in India Today, that health followed by education, very, very important. I also see rural development and agriculture being extremely critical, and the Prime Minister, looking at the face of the reforms that he has brought into his cabinet, the new faces, are not just social representation, they will represent governance in these three areas. And Narendra Modi's government will be seen as spearheading on each of these.
Okay. So let's take this step by step. We will talk about others who are out. You talk about education and, Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank also out. But I want to stay on health for just a moment. Siddharth Zarabi, how do you look at Dr. Harshvardhan putting in his papers just before the reshuffle?
There is one clear line from the peak of the pandemic, or actually earlier, which keeps coming back to me, which was when Health Secretary Rajesh Bhushan said India will give vaccines to only those who need it, not those who want it. And I believe that was, perhaps a statement that that quantifies and typifies the confusion, the lack of advanced information planning, and perhaps perception management at the health ministry. This point has been made in the past, and the health ministry officials and people close to both the minister and the secretary have said, regular updates were going out, warnings were going out. But in the larger scheme of things, we saw what happened, and the delay in the vaccination rollout program has actually cost India so much. If you try and quantify the delay in the vaccination program, given all that was done afterwards, and now hopefully, touch wood, we are all in a much better position.
Okay.
Roughly 6 months delay happened, and somewhere that had to be put on. The Prime Minister wanted to make sure that performance in that regard, there was some responsibility that was given. And if you look at the overall picture, I think the core areas of the Prime Minister's focus, not just in this government, but even previously, the core areas of health, education, labor, rural development are where we are seeing changes. So fresh blood coming in, but health, obviously, like you asked, a big move at this stage.
Okay, but Sandeep Ghosh, is this fixing accountability, or is this looking for a fall guy?
See, it might be interpreted in that way, Gaurav, but I think this is the right thing to do, because Dr. Harshvardhan was clearly out of depth during this whole crisis. And if it happens, whether you call it, wielding the axe or making somebody a scapegoat, the right thing would be to change the player out there. But, what you said earlier, I don't really hold him totally accountable for everything you said about anticipation, declaring victory, or exporting vaccines. But where he fell short really is the crisis management. Mm-hmm. At that point in time, the government appeared totally lost, clueless, and he, being the man at the helm, was certainly not coming across being in charge. And therefore, a replacement was required. And moving a step forward from what you've asked, Gaurav, health would be too important in the COVID scenario for the Prime Minister to anyway be seen as, not having total control.
Okay.
And this is an area I'm betting you may actually find a surprise in a very specialist of the domain coming in there, though he'll be at the clear oversight of the PMO and the HMO, who have been in any case handling. But you might get a domain expert coming in here, which will give the message that is not just about sacking somebody or moving and making a fall guy,
okay,
but we are dead serious and we're getting the right kind of profile to handle this going forward.
Okay, and who are the probables? We'll talk about that in greater detail. Rahul Srivastava, with his ear to the ground, joining us for more on this. But the much-awaited reshuffle of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's cabinet. Now, Dr. Harshvardhan, he's put in his papers. What we are now being told is Sarbanand Sonowal. We are also being told that Sarbanand Sonowal is coming in. Babul Supriyo is on his way out. Sadanand Gowda has also put in his papers. Now, let's look at the ministerial probables. Jyotiraditya Scindia, Sarbanand Sonowal, Anupriya Patel, Meenakshi Lekhi. They've met Prime Minister Narendra Modi at his residence ahead of the cabinet reshuffle. Senior ministers Rajnath Singh, the Union Defence Minister, and the Union Home Minister Amit Shah were present at the Prime Minister's residence. India Today now gets you an inside track of the big changes that are expected. Union Ministers Ramesh Pokhriyal, Thawarchand Gehlot, Debashri Chaudhary, Sadanand Gowda, Santosh Gangwar. They're the big names who are likely to be dropped from the cabinet. Now, 7 ministers are likely to be promoted. Sources are telling India Today, Anurag Thakur, Parshottam Rupala, G. Kishan Reddy will be promoted. And these are the first images that we get to you of that meeting that is taking place, that was taking place a short while back at the Prime Minister's residence. What we can also tell you is Kiran Rijiju, Hardeep Puri, R.K. Singh, Mansukh Mandavia are also likely to get a leg up. Rahul Srivastava with me on this big story. Rahul, what more can you add in terms of who's in, who's out? I'll just take a moment. Bring in Rahul Srivastava in just a moment. Kamal, what more can you tell us about this meeting at the Prime Minister's residence?
Well, clearly this is something that Modi too has been very keen on, to have a more inclusive cabinet. If you have a look, there are 12 SC, 8 STs, 27 OBCs, 11 women who are going to be representing cabinet. The average age has come down to 58. So they want to send out a message that in terms of community also, one Sikh minister, there are elevations. The interesting bit, because I cover Home Ministry, is that 3 people who were earlier associated with Home Ministry, we're talking about R.K. Singh, Kiran Rijiju, and now G. Kishan Reddy, all being there and likely to be elevated. So that is the news which is really coming in. What we know is that performance is something which is being lauded, and as an encouragement, the cabinets are rank being given and elevated for performance, but those who have not really performed have been dropped. That's the large message. The other point is about not just performance. Some of them is also because of ill health. There were people who were likely to be included, could not be done so. We also know that Ramesh Pokhriyal has not been doing too well. He was admitted in the hospital. Dr. Harshvardhan is the big name to be dropped. He has resigned. Babul Supriyo, who was actively participating in the Bengal elections, has been dropped. But there have been names, at least 5 names from Uttar Pradesh. Remember, the assembly elections are around the corner. They're going to be slated for next year. And that is how there is representation being done, not just from the states of election, but even as far as Northeast are concerned. Those ministers are also being, Sarbanand Sonowal, for instance, who made way for Himanta Biswa Sarma. He has been accommodated here in Modi government. So all this has been looked into. And remember, this is going to be a new start. But keeping in mind the performance, keeping in the part where COVID has been a huge setback as far as the government, at least the second wave, is concerned, they would want performance to be at par or perhaps even better than what was happening earlier. This is the first cabinet expansion.
Me on the broadcast, and Polemy, you've got lots of gen coming in on the thinking in terms of people who are being dropped and people who are being brought in. Polemy, bring us details.
That's right. Possibly, Gaurav, we will have to look back at the previous changes within the Union Council of Ministers, the expansion /rejig /reshuffles that have happened in the past. But what we can say that this looks possibly the biggest sort of transformation that a Union Council of Ministers under the Modi government has seen midterm as part of a course correction of sorts. This definitely seems like a course correction. This is not just about getting the regional and the caste balances right, or just with an eye on the upcoming assembly elections. This seems like a lot about making course correction, making evaluations about ministers, ministries, their performances, and then of course bringing in a lot of fresh, new, young blood. Some of them very experienced as well. There are at least 4 former chief ministers who are being brought in, who will be part of the new cabinet, the new Union Council of Ministers after the swearing in takes place, the new look of the Modi 2.0 cabinet. There are several who've been state ministers in the past as well, and there are others who have had no experience whatsoever ever. This is a larger cabinet. This is a much bigger cabinet. 43 ministers are expected to take oath today at 6 p.m. Not all of them new. Some of them will be elevated as well. Their rank will be changed. But clearly the biggest rejig that a Modi cabinet has seen since 2014. For instance, just one example of a state. West Bengal had two representatives in the Union Council of Ministers, Babul Supriyo and Debushree Chaudhary. Both of them have been dropped at the moment. And what we do know is that others, including Shantanu Thakur and as well as Nishit Pramanik, as well as John Barla and Subhash Sarkar. These are the four names who are being brought in, completely fresh to administration. They're being brought in. So two was the representation for West Bengal previously. Both have been dropped and four new in order to represent the state of West Bengal are being brought in. Again, keeping an eye on 2024 Lok Sabha in the state of West Bengal, Gaurav.
Okay, stay with me for the benefit of viewers joining us. Let's get you the top developments of this afternoon as at 3 p.m. Now, India Today has learned there will be 43 ministers who will take oath at 6 p.m. 4 former chief ministers and 18 former state ministers are to be a part of the cabinet. Now, apart from that, 10 sitting ministers are being removed, including Dr. Harshvardhan, Babul Supriyo, Ramesh Pokhriyal, Sadanand Gowda, Debushree Chaudhary, Santosh Gangawar and Pratap Sarangi. 11 women leaders are to be a part of the new team of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So the focus very clearly on diversity in the cabinet, adequate representation also being focused for the OBC and minorities is what leaders in the Bharatiya Janata Party are telling India Today. Young blood also being infused in the cabinet. Sources have told India Today 14 cabinet ministers will now be below the age of 50. Several young leaders like Jyotiraditya Scindia and Shantanu Thakur have met Prime Minister Narendra Modi at his residence. Now, top performing ministers are also likely to be rewarded. Sources are telling India Today that ministers like Kiran Rijiju, Hardeep Puri and R.K. Singh could get a leg up or additional responsibilities. We also have breaking news coming in. This is a complete overhaul of Team Narendra Modi. 11 ministers have now resigned. Rao Saab Patil also has put in his papers. Sources are telling India Today 4 MPs are to take oath from West Bengal, as Paulami was just telling us. Nishit Pramanik, John Barla, Shantanu Thakur and Subhash Sarkar, all likely to be made ministers of state. Now, this is a big message that is going out ahead of Bengal elections in 2024. That is where that will remain again one of the key focus areas of the Bharatiya Janata Party. I once again want to bring in our National Affairs Editor Rahul Srivastav for more on this. Rahul, we've been looking at focus Uttar Pradesh that sends maximum number of MPs. Also, of course, assembly elections in Uttar Pradesh in 6 months from now. Also Maharashtra. But a key focus area also remains Bengal, Rahul.
Yes, Gaurav, definitely. That's a very interesting element actually you raised. You see, the government is not just looking definitely, as Manisha was saying, at administrative fixes in improving the delivery mechanism. It's looking at future elections. 27 OBC ministers are going to be there, part of the Council of Ministers, a large number from ST and ST. But the important fact is the regional representation. The BJP, by getting more people and removing old people, perhaps paying them for work in the state, like somebody like Babul Supriyo, less valuable in the council, more valuable on the ground, is looking at a battle which has already been lost but preparing for the future. So if you look at the whole canvas, the entire canvas of Council of Ministers, it's a very broad, diversified messaging happening as far as the Council of Ministers is concerned. You see, Gaurav, if you talk about OBC members, there are many castes which have been included, but remember they hail from 15 states in the country. That means a lot of work has gone in to pick up those regional aspirations of various demographies when this council has been decided. If Harshvardhan is going and somebody new is being brought in, means the government is admitting we made a mistake, but for future, because the pandemic is around, we are ready to work harder.
Okay. Manisha Priyam, when you look at these key takeaways, as far as you are concerned, what is that big headline that comes from this reshuffle?
So the big headline, as Rahul Srivastava has already said, that yes, governance is key. The key focus areas are health, education, rural livelihoods. That's going to be extremely important. In terms of the dynamics on the ground, yes, battles have been lost, but remember, lot of significance to what we see today as OBC, SC, etc. The subaltern Hindutva slogan is the slogan to go for the BJP as it heads towards the key North Indian state, the state level elections of Uttar Pradesh, but also 2024. Remember, a John Barla is diversity, minority representation, but also brings in that element not just of diversity, but also of control of a lot of the scheduled tribe population in the area, the Matua community, the SCs, from the Bhil Mauchi community representation. So one will see a renewed and re-energized 5th scheduled tribal area leadership, as well as scheduled caste and OBC leadership. Subaltern Hindutva it is for the BJP as it heads and plunges towards the the elections in Uttar Pradesh and thereafter 2024. So governance plus subaltern Hindutva, sabka saath, sabka vikas, reinvented. That's the message that I see from this reshuffle of the Narendra Modi government.
Okay, so you're saying it's Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas 2.0. India Today, of course, gets you more exclusive inside track of the new look of team Narendra Modi. So these 43 ministers who are going to take oath, 4 are former chief ministers, 18 are former state ministers, 39 are former MLAs, 23 MPs who've been in the house for more than 3 terms. A massive thrust on representation of women, youth and professionals, qualified professionals in the cabinet. Now sources say there will be 3 women ministers, 13 lawyers, 6 doctors, 5 engineers and 7 former civil servants. So the new cabinet will have 12 ministers from the Dalit community, each from different caste groups. 2 SC ministers will be of cabinet rank. As Rahul Srivastava was just pointing out, there will be 27 ministers, according to officials who are in touch with India Today. 19 backward caste representation, Yadavs, Kurmis, Jats, Darji, Koli and Vokaligas. There will be 8 tribal ministers from 7 different scheduled tribes. And Polemy, once again, as Rahul was pointing out, a lot of thought went into this into this reshuffle. The signal once again, as Manisha Priyam was pointing out, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, but key focus as of now remains Uttar Pradesh.
That's right. It's like I said, Gaurav, it's been a mix of a lot of things. While, of course, if you had to only focus on the elections and focus on new inductions, you could have just stuck with that. You should have just stuck with the new inductions. But the fact that so many are being dropped from the current Union Council of Ministers also goes to suggest that there has been a question mark about their performance. Otherwise, why would they be dropped? It had nothing to do with, you need to accommodate more people from UP, so you drop the others over here so that UP finds better representation. There was enough scope in the current Union Council of Ministers to expand. Prime Minister Modi had about 53 ministers. He could have expanded close to up to 80. So clearly he had space to do that. But the fact that he's dropping many of those who we've reported have submitted their resignations, including Sadanand Gowda, including Dr. Harshvardhan, Babu Supriyo, Rao Sahab Danwe, Sanjay Dhotre, Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank, who is of course being relieved of his duties because of ill health. All of these are being dropped in some cases, mostly for performance reasons. That's the buzz out of the whole health ministry as well. So clearly, a lot of thought has definitely gone into this in terms of not just getting the balance as far as region and caste right, and of course keeping an eye on the assembly elections in UP, Gujarat, UP, Uttarakhand, as well as these are the states that are going to polls. They've all, Himachal Pradesh, Anurag Thakur being elevated, they've all gotten benefits out of this process, but there's also the process of dropping the non-performers and bringing in new energy, fresh blood, some of it younger blood as well.
Siddharth Zarabi, focus also on governance. So it's not just an eye on elections, whether it's in Uttar Pradesh right now or, in 6 months from now or other states that will follow, but also on deliverables ahead of 2024. When it comes to a leg up, whether it's Hardeep Puri or Kiran Rijiju, G. Kishan Reddy, Anurag Thakur, is this performance-based, election-based?
Gaurav, several good questions, and let me just take the most important one. What is the underlying message when we look at the health, education and labor and even social justice change that happened yesterday? That was a governor appointment, but it is exit from the Council of Ministers. The broad focus of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's social welfare driven model and the politics around it remains, and that is primary. That takes a lion's share, a massive chunk of whatever is done. So let's not move away from that fact that the politics of the Modi government remains a politics that is connected deeply to ground level developments. Now, if you notice amongst all the reports of changes, there is also an interesting change with regard to drinking water, Minister of State level change. Remember, drinking water is one of the newer programs or more recent programs, which is part of the 4 or 5 very big ticket social welfare programs, rural infrastructure programs, which have yielded significant political dividend. And if you step back and connect it with all the people who are said to be moving out of the Council of Ministers, the 4 or 5 big positions, especially those related to the economy of the country, are likely, as of now, set to see continuity. What does that tell you? It tells you that the Atmanirbhar Bharat package campaign that was launched last year is a program which is perhaps going to continue to be piloted and helmed by the same people that they are doing it. Some more strengthening may happen if Anurag moves out, but the broad direction of the economic and the welfare policies does not change with this. Of course, this is going to be more like a rainbow council of ministers, and I think it adds to the diversity, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist people, and that is also a reflection of perhaps the changing nature of demands that are being placed on this government.
Okay, now since you were talking about performance and we've talked about Dr. Harshvardhan, Rahul Srivastav, when it comes to education, now a lot has been talked about, but when you see Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank putting in his papers, what was his performance analysis? And there was a detailed performance analysis in the weeks before this reshuffle.
Gaurav, see, Mr. Pokhriyal, largely the reason cited is his ill health. That's the reason why he has moved out. But Gaurav, if you trace what Prime Minister, how he has been gone on creating different newer paradigms, attempting to create different paradigms in education, and as just said, that the Prime Minister is looking at more challenges, and he needs to look at challenges. The education system in the country does need a certain degree of paradigm shift, like how we look at our economics and our key economic sectors. That needs to look at a change. Yesterday night, when we were on a discussion with Rahul on a show, Surab had said that they need to see what are the challenges. Say, for example, he had said trade and civil aviation, where Air India sale is still pending.
Yes.
You have to have reforms while you are a very strong government with 303 odd MPs. Still, you cannot push reforms. The farm laws are stuck. The labor laws are stuck. Your disinvestment is stuck. You need champions. You need catalysts who can deliver on that. I think the focus of this change is delivery providing new legs, new mind, delivery when it comes to governance, and delivery when it comes to politics. Politics remains the overarching theme. Rest in that, administrative and other things get fitted in.
Sure. So, main focus does remain, I mean, for any government is to win elections and to be able to deliver. But Manisha Priyam, if we were to take the example of farm laws being stuck, how does that move forward?
So, in a sense, the government, after the first round of trying to have discussions, 4 or 5 rounds when the farmers came, etc., the government has stuck to the ground. There is no going back on the farm laws. So you've got the farmers sitting in protest, the government has stuck to where it is. But if the government can seem to be moving ahead on the health front, the COVID that has touched every household in India, if it is seen to be making the massive transformations in health infrastructure delivery, not just vaccinations, and if it is seen to be making the transformations that the new education policy, remember, on the eve of the swearing in of the 2019 government of Shri Narendra Modi, the draft national education policy was put on the website that evening. So that is priority. The Kasturi Rangan committee report, massive and overarching changes. I would say that for now, this government would stick to the farm laws. It has been passed after due deliberation in both the houses of parliament, and therefore the government, given the majority that it has, does not want to be seen as weak. So health, education, topped up with rural livelihoods, if changes can be made, and if the social accommodation, remember, every representative that you have from the scheduled caste community, whether it is the OBC, it is the Nishads or the Kurmis or the Koiris, they are also representative of rural India. So if those changes in rural livelihoods can be delivered on the ground, there would be governance out there to counter the farmers' protests. So I think the government does have some strategy somewhere that it wants to deliver and show, rather than cow down to what it sees as protests. So some strategy really there, and I think one has to wait and see of what type of deliveries are made, not just in health and education, but in rural livelihoods, that I consider key, especially in the wake of the pandemic. Rural distress is absolutely immense.
Yes.
Remember, these are the poorest of the poor. These are the people whose representatives the Modi government is taking in very large numbers today. So whether it's the livelihoods versus farmers battle that can be played out, that is what needs to be seen.
Now, even though there will be elections and farmers' issue may be big in pockets, whether it's Western Uttar Pradesh or subsequently Haryana and Punjab, as far as the government is concerned, there is no movement back on the farm laws. That's what the government says. With new faces coming in, you see a renewed addressing this issue?
Manisha.
Sandeep, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. I don't know whether you were asking Manisha or me.
No, I was asking you.
I think they will have to, tackle. First of all, I'd like to preface this by saying you were asking what was the change. I think Narendra Modi now wants to leave a mark, as the Prime Minister. So second phase, you're going to see a lot of these very qualitative shifts, as Manisha was explaining, which will distinguish his government on these key parameters. And of that, farm is one, and one we have missed, we have not discussed so far, is this Ministry of Cooperation. Yes. My own suspicion is this is something to counter the farm law situation where there is this whole apprehension about big corporates gaining unfair advantage over small and marginal farmers. They will try to do something by saying no, by organizing cooperatives on the line of Amul and what they have in Maharashtra. That is how you will take on the bargaining power of. So you'll see a lot of that on the farm law side. But farm law, I do not think, Gaurav, whatever be the pressure, they will have to diffuse it politically, and that diffusion is already happening in various ways. Okay,
it indeed is. And that other big story we were focusing on since last several days is key focus on Uttar Pradesh. Elections 6 months away around, and 7 leaders from the state are likely to get a place in Team Narendra Modi. Anupriya Patel, Kaushal Kishore, SP Baghel, Pankaj Chaudhary, BL Verma, Ajay Mishra and Bhanu Pratap Verma are expected to be the new faces in the Narendra Modi government 2.0's first cabinet reshuffle. Post this reshuffle, I once again want to bring in Rahul Srivastava for more on this. And Rahul, you've been covering Uttar Pradesh for decades. The BJP has had a dream run in UP in 2014, Lok Sabha elections 2017, assembly elections and 2019 Lok Sabha once again. To repeat 2017 assembly elections, especially after farmers' agitation, perhaps as many argue, Yogi Adityanath's style of functioning, this change, how does that help, especially working with all the caste equations?
Gaurav, see, UP is a very complex matrix, and that is why when Prime Minister does something like this, give a large representation from people from Uttar Pradesh, I will say just it is yet another break in a wall that the Prime Minister has to build. This is not all. He will have to do more. But the fact is that there is a readiness and an attempt to correct the picture. Now see what has happened. The BJP traditionally has done well in Uttar Pradesh because its traditional support usually has been the upper caste. As Manisha said, the dispossessed subalterns and subaltern Hindutva. That element has got together with the BJP whenever there has been a strident wave, be the temples period or since 2014. Now, what the BJP managed in 2014, 17 and 19, build a wonderful rainbow coalition of demographies which have actually not been traditional BJP voters. That it got the non-Jatav SCs, it got the NBCs, non-Yadav OBCs, and put them together with the upper caste and others. And that gave the BJP great successes in Uttar Pradesh. But Yogi Adityanath's one style of functioning, and also, Gaurav, when you bring too many disparate communities together, there are aspirations which work against each other, there are jealousies. Eventually, because of that, I think 3 to 4 months ago, the BJP realized that the entire fabric which they had built to defeat the opposition in UP handsomely is actually getting tattered. And that's why you see a Jiten Prasada being brought in. Yes. Yogi Adityanath told to go and meet Keshav Maurya and give a signal to the NBCs. This is one big step. What I say, that's why, that when it comes to fixing political issues, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his team has an impeccable track record. The real challenge will be the administrative and the economic challenges.
Indeed. Manisha Priyam, how do you look at new faces from Uttar Pradesh and elections and the assembly elections subsequently?
So I see very astute handling of the Uttar Pradesh situation. It's been handled since the rejig in the party organization there. Bureaucrat Arvind Sharma, trusted by the Prime Minister and his team, having been put in charge in a senior position in the party there, one amongst the 17 of the vice, but definitely vice president posts in the party, but definitely very, very important. Amongst the ministers who will be taken in today, whose names are floating with the Modi government, you never know, there could be changes, but of what we hear, I feel definitely the eastern Uttar Pradesh scenarios being very well handled with the Nishad, the legacy of Jamna Nishad, Sanjay Nishad all on one side, the Sonalal Patel family, Anupriya Patel making a comeback. So Om Prakash Rajbar, who's been sulking since the last general elections, came into the BJP at the last minute, sidelined for the moment because he's also dilly-dallying with the Samajwadi Party and the Aam Aadmi Party. But the other OBCs totally consolidated. In terms of caste equations, I find that the Kurmi and Kushwaha caste equations have been handled very well. From Agra, you can see one hears of the induction on your channel of Shri Baghel, who also belongs to the SC community. Remember, it is this area, the Western Uttar Pradesh area, where the pitched battle for the BJP is on the farm laws and the farmers' agitation. One possible way of dealing with it is that farmers are those who are landed. If the BJP can make an inroad with the scheduled caste community on its own, as well as with some alliances that may happen, surprise, surprise, then the BJP would have had two different possible strategies for the state, but it can stitch it all together it's the merger and alliance politics that the BJP plays very well on the ground. But as far as Uttar Pradesh is concerned now, the party as well as the representation of Caste seem to be quite well aligned. Prior to me, Shri Rahul Srivastava has already made a mention of Jitin Prasad, etc. coming in. So the upper caste consolidation has already been there in the government, and with entries of new leaders, you will now find a stitching together of grounded alliances amongst the most backward castes and the Dalit community, and one has to see whether this new strategy yields the Modi government the necessary dividends that it has to get in Uttar Pradesh to be able to make a comeback in the 2024 elections. Uttar Pradesh is important for the state elections, but Uttar Pradesh is also the route to Delhi and therefore extremely important. Keep your eyes there, and I find India Today has given a very good analysis through the day of the names that are possible, but also the reasons and the strategies of why these inductions are being made from the state of Uttar Pradesh.
Uttar Pradesh does remain one of our key focus areas as of now. The state of Uttar Pradesh, as Manisha Priyam, Rahul Srivastava were pointing out, extremely crucial in the BJP's scheme of things, not just in assembly elections, but also for 2024. Now, the BJP and allies, the NDA, all set to get a lion's share in the Modi Cabinet 2.0. Now, what's to expect when it comes to leadership from the state? We'll take a look.
It's the mother of all state elections. The battle for Uttar Pradesh. And it kicks off just 6 months from now. The big tremors have already begun. The warriors have begun to lay out their battle plans. And you'd better believe that the centre has its gaze fixed on UP's state of war too. The impending reshuffle of Modi's Council of Ministers is certain to have a strong UP flavour. With the balancing of caste equations in mind, sources say that the reshuffle is expected to send out a political signal by correcting regional representation, especially in Uttar Pradesh. There is speculation that the BJP may send one minister from UP back to state politics and make place to induct UP BJP President Swatantra Dev Singh in the centre. But sources strike a note of caution, pointing out that this would mean getting a new BJP state president just months before the election. After super successful poll performances in Uttar Pradesh in the 2017 assembly polls and 2019 Lok Sabha elections, the Yogi Adityanath administration has sustained a fair amount of caste-driven damage, something the Prime Minister would like to correct on a war footing going into the polls. The BJP's internal reading is that groups including OBCs, MBCs and Dalits are in urgent need of a signal from the BJP. And that's where the following likely movement springs up. Prominent OBC player and Apna Dal Supremo Anupriya Patel, who has been sidelined since 2019, is likely to find herself as a newly minted union minister this week. A leader from the Nishad party could also be accommodated. The possibility of a leader representing the dominant Brahmin community and a Dalit leader could also find a place in the reshuffled cabinet. One day. It's the battle that will define 2022, and the big wheels have begun to turn. With Himanshu Mishra and Rahul Srivastava in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
A quick break, but there's a very interesting story coming up on the other side when we talk about the younger faces, the new faces